Welcome to PM Ready, your guide to becoming PMP certified. This is the lesson in which we review workflows. This lesson includes a review of the key documents and artifacts of project management processes and how these flow and are changed and modified through the different project management processes. This lesson covers artifacts such as the needs assessment, business case and benefits management plan, the project charter and project management plan, change requests, deliverables, work performance data, information and reports, lessons learned, requirements, scope, activities, schedule, costs, budget, quality metrics and measurements and reports, and finally resources, risks, and procurement. There are some key artifacts and documents that come before even the initiating process group. These are documents that don't have any specific PMI process to generate them. Which are these documents, and how do they connect and relate to each other? They are the needs assessment, the business case, and the benefits management plan. The needs assessment describes the need for the project and presents a proposal to address this need. The project business case then provides the economic feasibility study to support or justify the project. And the project benefits management plan, which details how the benefits will be realized after the project is completed. These start with the needs assessment first, which is used to develop the business case, and the benefits management plan is used to update the business case. The business case is then used to create the benefits management plan, which may also feed back to and update the business case, which in turn is a major input to the project charter, which is where the PMI processes begin. To initiate a project, to use those processes that are part of the initiating process group. Which are these two processes and what are their primary outputs? They are to develop the project charter and identify stakeholders. The develop project charter has as its main output the project charter, which provides a high-level overview of the project, authorizes the project, and is a key input to creating the project management plan and all of its subsidiary or component plans. The Identify Stakeholders process has as its main output the stakeholder register, which lists the stakeholders and their needs and expectations, as well as some analysis of the stakeholders. How about the deliverables? This is a key one. How do the deliverables flow through the different processes in project management? They start with the direct and manage project work process, which is the only process that has as an output deliverables. It's the process that does all of the work of creating these deliverables. What then happens to those deliverables? They then go to the control quality process, where they're compared against the quality requirements to see if the quality requirements have been met. And if they have been, these deliverables are given a new name, which is verified deliverables. And then those verified deliverables go where? To the validate scope process, which is about sitting down with the stakeholders and reviewing the deliverables and the quality requirements that have been met and demonstrating that this is now fit for purpose and fit for use, and getting the acceptance of the key stakeholders. Once that acceptance has been gained, these deliverables are then given another new name, accepted deliverables. These then flow into the close project or phase process at the end of your project. And again, the name of these deliverables is changed, this time to final product, service, or result transition. This can be a little confusing in that these names change so much, and through these different processes that go through these different knowledge areas of integration and quality and scope and back to integration again. But it's important to understand and remember how these flow. Change requests. How do these flow through the various processes? First of all, change requests can come from just about anywhere and from just about anyone in any process. They're outputs from all sorts of processes. But no matter where they come from, they all must go through the Perform Integrated Change Control process, which is the one and only process that reviews all change requests and decides whether or not they should be approved. This is the process that combines the analysis of the impact on scope and schedule and cost and risks and quality and so on to decide whether or not this change request should be approved. And if it is approved, where does it go from there? Primarily to the direct and manage project work, which is the one and only process that then implements these changes that have been requested and approved. Copies are also sent to Control Quality, which reviews the work done in direct and managed project work to make sure that the approved change request was properly implemented. Also, it goes to Control Procurements because some changes will affect your contract and relationship with outside vendors. How about work performance? How does work performance data, information, and reports flow? It starts with direct and managed project work, which is the one and only process that generates work performance data. That data is then used by monitoring and controlling processes in all of the other knowledge areas. These other processes then generate work performance information by analyzing this work performance data, comparing actuals to plan, and so on. That information then goes to one process, the Monitor and Control Project Work process, which combines all of this information and is the one process that generates work performance reports, which organize this information and present it to the right people at the right time in order for them to make decisions and take action and be aware of what's going on the project. Next, we have lessons learned. How do these flow through the project? To remember this, it's important to keep in mind that the register is the one that is project specific. Your lessons learned register is filled with lessons learned from your specific project. On the other hand, the lessons learned repository is an organizational process asset that is shared by other projects, especially later projects. The way this flows is that when a project starts and as it's progressing, it can use information from the lessons learned repository, information from previous projects. But then the project itself generates new lessons learned that it keeps in the lessons learned register. And those stay in the register usually until the end of a phase or the end of the project, at which point they are added as needed to the lessons learned repository for the organization. Now, how about the key workflow through the scope management knowledge area? Think of all of the processes involved in scope management, particularly in planning, and what the main outputs are. First, we have the project charter as an input that is developed from the develop project charter process. This is actually part of integration management, but it's an important input into the collect requirements process, which is part of scope management. Collect requirements then generates requirements documentation and the requirements traceability matrix. And the next step, which uses this as input, is the define scope process. Define scope takes this information and creates a project scope statement, which is your detailed statement of the project scope. That detailed information about the project and what needs to be done is then an input to the create WBS process, which organizes this information into a work breakdown structure and work breakdown structure dictionary, adds that to the project scope statement to create what is known as the scope baseline, which at the proper point will be baselined. Next, think of the schedule planning processes and their main inputs and outputs and how they connect to each other. First, you have the scope baseline. Also, resource requirements and the project schedule if you've already generated one and you're revisiting this process. Those are inputs to the define activities process, which creates your activity list and activity attributes, plus your milestone list, which are then input into the sequence activities process, which outputs your project schedule network diagrams. Then you estimate your activity durations and output your duration estimates and basis of estimates. And these are inputs to the develop schedule process, which creates your schedule baseline, your project schedule, schedule data, and project calendars. Now, how about cost management planning? As inputs, you have the scope baseline and your project schedule. Also, your resource requirements. With that information, you can now estimate costs and generate your cost estimates and basis of estimates, which you can then use to determine budget and output the cost baseline as well as the project funding requirements. Now let's consider quality management across planning, executing, and monitoring and controlling, and how they interact. See if you can remember the processes and the major inputs and outputs. First, we have plan quality management, which outputs your quality metrics, which are used by the control quality process to measure and create quality control measurements, which are then used by the manage quality process, which in turn generates quality reports. Notice that this flow goes from planning, skips execution, and goes over to monitoring and controlling, and then loops back into the executing process group, going from plan quality management to control quality to manage quality. And when it comes to planning resource management, think of the major steps or processes and the principal inputs and outputs, the main documents and artifacts. We start with plan resource management, which creates two outputs, your resource management plan and your team charter. These are then inputs to your estimate activity resources process, which coordinates with scope and schedule planning to come up with your schedule and cost baselines. It outputs the resource requirements, basis of estimates, and resource breakdown structures that are needed by these other processes. Now, moving on from planning to executing in the resource management knowledge area, The main inputs are the resource requirements and basis of estimates and resource breakdown structure from planning. These go then into the acquire resources process, which acquires these resources and has as its outputs the physical resource assignments, the project team assignments, and the resource calendars with details of when these resources are available. This information is then used to develop the team. And the main output of developed team is team performance assessments, which are inputs to the manage team process. Next, we have the risk management knowledge area. And for this, we'll cover planning, executing, and monitoring and controlling processes. We start with identify risks, which has as its outputs the risk register and risk report. These will be still incomplete at this point, but this is where they start. These outputs are then inputs to the perform qualitative risk analysis process, which adds your qualitative risk analysis, which includes things like your probability and impact matrix and your prioritization of risks, and puts this information into the risk register and some summary information into the risk report. This information is then input into the perform quantitative risk analysis, which quantifies the risk of some of your highest priority risks that were identified as being high priority. The output is this quantitative risk analysis, which is then added to your risk register and risk report. With this information in your risk register and risk report, you're now ready to plan risk responses, where you come up with specific proactive measures that you can take, different strategies that you can follow for individual risks and assign risk owners. This information is then added to your risk register and risk report. These are then inputs to the process of implement risk responses. The output, again, is that you update your risk register and risk report with the results of implementing your risk responses. And these are input to your monitor risks process. And your monitoring activities update your risk register and risk report. Notice that it's always the risk register and risk report that contain the updates of all of these processes. And now we come to procurement management. Think about planning, executing, and monitoring and controlling processes and the main artifacts. The first process is plan procurement management, which has many outputs. Your procurement management plan, your procurement strategy, your bid documents, your procurement statement of work, your source selection criteria, your make or buy decisions, and perhaps some independent cost estimates. These and other key artifacts are used along with seller proposals, which you then analyze in your conduct procurements process and select a seller, and as an output, you have agreements or contracts with these vendors. Those are then inputs to your conduct procurements process, and then those in the end, when the vendor has finished their work, results in closed procurements. In this lesson, we've covered some of the key workflows of key artifacts in project management, because by focusing on these artifacts and how they connect to each other and relate to each other, it makes it much easier for you to understand what you need to do next on the project, where to find what you're looking for, and what you need when. And it's particularly helpful for those questions on the PMP exam that ask just these sorts of situational questions. PM Ready is a publication of PM Guaranteed and is based on the Project Management Institute's PMBOK guide.